Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Welcome to SAP UI5 versus Flutter and AWS versus Azure. Andy and I are going to talk about some of the framework and decision criteria that a lot of companies probably consider, and this is particularly a case study with Xcel Energy. My name is Joe Peichel. I am an enterprise architect at Xcel Energy. Actually, this month I'm celebrating my 10th anniversary there. And I've been in the IT industry, technology business, I should say, since about the mid to late 1970s, which is why when Sam was asking those questions about things like green screens and Xerox Palo Alto Research Center, yeah, I lived that. I was brought to Xcel Energy to help drive mobile capability, and it's been quite a journey. And I'm happy to say that today we are really accelerating into a mobile future for the company, along with a much more mature user experience space. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how that unfolds in a couple of work streams. Personally, I have 5 kids and 3 grandkids, and when I'm not working, I get to enjoy a lot of time with them, and really grateful to have that time. And first of all, thank you all for being here today. This has been a very exciting event, and I am happy to be here as a presenter and to represent Xcel Energy here. Andy?
Thanks, Joe. My name is Andy Prier. I worked with Joe in Xcel Energy and Justin Onesti, who's out here in the crowd, to do some of the UX portions of this project and initiative at Xcel Energy. To kind of dive right into it, what we'll talk about today is who is Xcel Energy, their UX journey, the mindset partnership, and then how we get started and compare and contrast architecture. So I'll kick us off today with who is Xcel Energy. All the highlighted states that you see there is the coverage areas that Xcel covers. And they do both gas, electricity, covering 8 states with 4.5 million customers in total, with outages that happen and it needs to be addressed. And so that was the scope of one of our projects. Another scope of our project was having to do with time entry, capturing that time within SAP, and making sure that those are tracked against specific assets. I'm going to start off by going over a little bit about one of the drivers for UX. And mostly this has to do with a persona for our field workers. These are folks who are addressing outages, who are remote or inside of a vehicle. You know, the types of things that they deal with in a day could be outages, could be repairs, could be many types of different things. It could be installations. So whenever we're trying to define what is the value for that, a lot of that's automating some of what the user is trying to accomplish. Whenever they're in the field, it could be that they don't have time to take, a clipboard or a computer with them. This is kind of the things that has to happen from an outage. We have, SMS messages that has to go to customers. We have notifications that will be on the website. We'll have information that needs to flow back to the person who's working the outage. They have to know what location to go to. So a lot of things in this ecosystem has to happen. And it's not just SAP, right? It's also other types of technologies, the mainframe system that they have at Xcel Energy. All of those have to come together. And so Xcel has worked really hard to improve this customer relationship they have by blasting this out on Twitter, again on their website, Facebook, just really highly communicating with their customers and improving that customer experience. But it takes a lot of work to gather, very simple on-the-ground types of information and surfacing that up to the customer. So that kind of kicks off where this employee experience transformation started. This is where, around the point when Mindset got engaged, but it really started around 2019. And the idea is to be highly innovative, improve user experience with the field workers, really surface the value of SAP, and make it something that's very, very transparent. The devices that were primarily in use are these hard-use laptops. They're called MDTs. Still in use today, but as part of this journey those are starting to age out. We need to replace them. We need to improve user experience there. There's challenges that comes with it, as you might imagine, taking care of laptops, pushing updates to it, things like that, it can be a little challenging. So the user experience today that those devices look like is something like this, right? If anyone has ever seen SAP Work Manager, this is kind of an insight into that. And so as a part of doing this work, the driver would have to enter some information, would have to say they're en route, on site, in progress, and there was improvement areas that could be seen there versus previous solutions. So a lot of the things that we saw during design thinking was just challenges of them following the process. Whether it be, I'm going to go on site, and once I get there could be a police officer who is telling them where they need to move their truck, where they need to go and assess how long it's going to take to fix an outage. And so they didn't have time to go to their MDT and input that. It was something that they would do after the fact. Meanwhile, customers want to have insights into when is the power going to come back on for me? We saw that the data entry was a little heavy, so we wanted to look at ways to improve that user experience to entering that, especially like on a mobile device. Oftentimes it didn't happen until they got there. Like I said, it could be after the fact that they would go in there. I remember one of the trouble men told me, he said, I would just do everything at once. I would go through each status, change it until it was done, until power was restored. So within a 2 to 5 minute period, he would do his work, enter it, and then he was done. So this is our first project that we worked with. And it really has to do with the time card application. This is SAP Fiori. It's tailored to look a lot like what Xcel Energy what their branding was. Yep, a lot of their branding we took and incorporated into the UI5 application. And just to give some screenshots, what that looked like versus like a standard time card. You might notice some things you can see here is you can assign time to assets. You can add types of hours that were there, things like that. So this is what one of those look like. We have the capability to show hours that were spent on it, to give a summary of the week before we submitted to make sure that the accuracy was there. And so this is one I think Joe is going to talk mostly about today, because there was a lot of architecture that had to go underneath that. This was a Google Flutter application that has to do with outages. It shows what is the location of an outage, what is the details surrounding that, what is the things you should know whenever you come on site there. Is there a pin to get into a gate? Is there potentially a dangerous dog in the area? Things like that, notes that a user would want to have before they went in. And most importantly, it would fit in their pocket, right? They're not going out with their MDT to look at this information or going back and forth to the truck. They're able to do this within the field. So another thing that we worked with users is they had to change screens a lot, or they had to change applications. So we wanted to have a view of, here's my map view versus my list view of like, this is the important information I need to know, or where on the map do I need to go? What is the status of this, especially if your persona is more of a manager in the field, viewing field service, what are the status of each one of these? They would be able to use the application to look at that. All right, so here I'm going to transition it over to Joe about where do you start? How did we start this process? What were the steps that we do there? What were some of the decision criteria that came from Xcel Energy to make the decisions we did for this initiative? So Joe?
Sure. So, as Andy said, this has really been a journey. We started with some design thinking workshops, which told us a lot about what the field experience really was and where the pain points were for the folks who had to do this work on MDTs. And we actually explored a couple of different cases to decide on what we should tackle first. And one of the things that came out of that was the time reporting. We went through a lot of thinking about what those priorities were, what the platform and capabilities were that underpinned those priorities, and what it was going to take for us to deliver. In the case of the time reporting application, one of the things that helped us focus on that was that we already had UI5, the Fiori time tile available to us. And initially, it was important for Xcel Energy and the employee experience transformation team to deliver a win fairly early on. And that really helped to drive the focus on Fiori as a delivery vehicle for that. Because we really only had to do some tailoring of that experience to simplify the experience and remove some of the elements that were unnecessary complexity for our users in the field, and to really give them the focus of the things that were important characteristics of their time entry. As Andy mentioned, some of the asset connections for the time that they're spending doing the work, and even just the act of authenticating and getting connected to the application was an important aspect of it. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later on in the slides, but with UI5, we were able to integrate an internet-based single sign-on capability that was just emerging at the time for us. We have completed a migration over the last year and a half to Azure Active Directory as our identity provider and our single sign-on capability. And we had a way to integrate that with initially the SAP Cloud Platform, and then subsequently through to our on-prem environment using Azure AD App Proxy. I'll talk a little bit more about that as we get further on. The other use case that Andy mentioned was the electric outage restoration application, and that was one that we did in Flutter. And really a primary characteristic of that was, how do we do this in a way that we'll be able to leverage more of that in later iterations, not just for this application, but for what we expect to be a portfolio of mobile applications evolving over time. And we've seen that come to fruition. We now have a portfolio of about 4 different mobile apps that are run in Flutter, and I'll talk a little bit about some of that capability as we get further on. Let's see. I hate to do this.
With Flutter, you know, part of that was we had to look at what is the right platform for all this, right? So Fiori wasn't necessarily the right the right tool for being offline, for being available, mobile all the time in the field, especially in outage areas. It could be cell phone towers are out. So we had to establish what is the platform that you build that on to be somewhat disconnected and be resilient to those kinds of environments. So we had to start off with looking at Xcel Energy's current state. And we knew that Fiori was an option, and if SAP was the first place to go, we would always start there. It just makes sense. It's so much faster to market. We have to start with a current state. On current state, you have to look at what resources do you have available? What platforms are you using right now? What does your staff know how to do, right? And some of this, I think, was new to Xcel Energy. At one point, I can't remember who it was. It might have been you, Joe, who told me that we just got Wi-Fi at Xcel Energy a few years ago, right?
I think that probably was me.
And so we had to start a platform to support this mobile capability. So we looked at current state and decided, what are all the inventory of the things that we have, and let's take note of that and write those things down. And so that takes us to the next step here with our technology strategy. We had to put that together and present that to the leadership team to say, this is what our plan is. We want to use SAP as our back end for how we're managing assets, how we're managing the maintenance on that, and we have to update it for outages. We want to have a mobile application platform that it doesn't care if it's on what mobile device it is, if it's an Android, if it's an iPhone, if it's a tablet, whatever those might be. We were trying to think farther ahead in the future. Right. So we had to put together a technology strategy, right? And as a part of that technology strategy, we definitely had some discussions
right.
to figure out, what was the right thing for Xcel. But it's essentially what we decided is we had to take data out of the systems that existed within Xcel Energy, put them on the cloud, and make it accessible to the mobile device, right? And so security was definitely inbuilt as a part of that.
Right.
So on the next part, we're looking at what are the right problems to work on, right? Getting executive buy-in to spend more money on different systems is, I'm sure many of you are here aware, asking for more money for different cloud and developers and contractors to come in and build something is not always an easy thing to do. So we had to pick the right problems to focus on first. And so to begin with, that really had to do with AWS. The SDK Flutter is free. Anyone can download it, anyone can deploy to an app store with it, so the cost wasn't there so much. I believe we did some initial investigations into how secure it was, things like that. But that was kind of the first problem was we needed a platform on the cloud. And at that time, the decision was made we'd use AWS.
Right. And really, that's part of that conversation was at a leadership level. Xcel Energy was trying to carve out its own strategy with respect to cloud capabilities, recognizing that as a regulated utility, we have certain constraints, and who could we partner with that was going to be able to help us meet those regulatory requirements particularly, and where can we act without creating a potential significant compliance risk. And leadership at the time felt that AWS were probably the best cloud partner to pursue that with. And so even though the EXT, the employee experience transformation work, was a major consumer of that, we had already begun that journey in the customer side of the business. So customer was already leading in that space, and what we were doing with the employee experience was really just kind of augmenting what we had already started in the customer side. And when we get to the later part of the discussion, I'll talk a little bit about how we've come full circle with that now. But with leveraging AWS as middleware and Flutter as that primary front end, we really set the stage for additional evolutionary steps toward a more robust and long-lived platform capability for not just the workforce, but eventually customer. And I'll talk a little more about that as we get further on.
Yeah, and I think the last few things here is many times convincing folks that building an application is a little bit more than just I'm going to build an app and show it off, right? So doing the homework, figuring out the technology you're going to use, what's the platform, build the platform, and then you can put your mobile application on the top of that. So just knowing that you have to have a solid foundation to build an application on is a lot of work that you have to do on the front end. And so, and Joe will talk about this more, but with UI5, right, you get that out of the box from SAP. It's already there for you. With what we had to do with mobile applications, this is a path we decided to go. And so then finally, the application development is where we started to show MVPs, show like what the user experience was going to be. We delivered it in an agile way. We had a product owner who was able to share that with our users. And they could see incrementally changes as they happened. So, Joe, you want to talk about the architecture piece?
Sure. So as I mentioned, we were dealing with really a catalog of capabilities. Part of it centered on AWS, part of it centered on Azure, and particularly Azure Active Directory. And from a UX perspective, of course, UI5 and Google Flutter. And really the things that drove that decision, those kinds of decisions, came down to what was the priority for a particular thing. And I actually mentioned this a little earlier. With the Fiori stuff, the focus really was speed. What can we deliver in the shortest time frame? And the decision, that drove the decision to go with UI5 and the existing SAP foundation to build on top of. We used Azure AD as the single sign-on mechanism, first using SAP Cloud Platform as essentially the front-end host, and then subsequently migrating back to our internal SAP platform in the Fiori, the NetWeaver gateway, to be able to produce that, to provide that UI experience through the Azure AD app proxy. And that was a relatively smooth transition. We did have a little bit of friction of going from the Fiori app to a pure browser-based environment, but it was comparatively smooth, and we've seen consistent user growth going beyond just the field force to now include people that are normally in their office, or well, now we're all semi-remote at least some of the time, and the option to be able to do their timesheets on their phone was a really compelling user experience. So that audience building has been a real benefit for us and helped to demonstrate the value. On the Flutter side with AWS, as I mentioned, the customer experience group had initiated that platform work, and with the employee experience, we just kind of built on top of that. Although with customer, they chose a different front-end approach to it than what we did with employee experience. And I think part of that was just a matter of timing, as well as some executive leadership who were open to other options. And understanding where we needed to get to longer term, Andy mentioned the disconnected scenario. We also expected to have to get to essentially a lower level of interaction to the device itself than what you might normally think of with, say, a single-page app that's based on a less deep a shallower framework, if you want to think of it that way. We knew that we were going to have to get to that fairly close to the metal type experience in the application, in future applications. And really, Flutter provided that depth for us. And when paired with AWS, as it was already evolving toward that enterprise cloud platform, excuse me, it was a clear winner for that future state. Some of the things that we learned were really about paying attention to what our needs were, and really selecting the right tool for the job. Pick out the skill sets that we could leverage internally, and the technology platform things, and who do we want to partner with to help us get that done, and whether that's a cloud provider like AWS or Azure, or a service provider like Mindset. It's important to know what your priorities are and what partners will serve you best in that particular use case scenario. So with Flutter, Flutter provides a fast development environment. You know, it's almost a WYSIWYG kind of experience if you're developing with the Flutter toolkit. So a lot of what we've grown used to in what we used to call rapid application development environments, drag and drop kinds of capabilities that were connected to data that underpinned that experience, that user interaction element. Really important facet of this. The ability to really control the UI at a granular level. We, as part of Flutter, part of our Flutter toolkit, we have moved into a full design system based on Xcel Energy's brand standards and some compliance things that we had to make sure that we were stitching in. I don't know how many of you have ever dealt with Section 508 of the Americans with Disabilities Act, but it's an area that we tripped up on in some previous environments. And so we wanted to make sure that our design system fully embraced compliance for things like Section 508, and we made accessibility an important facet of the design system. So Flutter really delivers that capability for us. We have the built-in widgets that we can take advantage of, and more than just the widgets themselves, but the ability to refine them and bring the Xcel Energy brand into those interaction components. Again, as I said, it was close to the metal, right? So if we need to interact with things like Bluetooth or even RFID, those are things that we're going to be able to take advantage of. And even though we didn't have a use case right out of the gate for those things, when you start dealing with the Internet of Things and the industrial Internet of Things and smart grid, and what we anticipate these devices being used for sometime in the future, we wanted to make sure we didn't shortchange ourselves in the framework that we chose to be able to deliver that capability. And then that's another aspect that Flutter brings to the table. And of course, the talent pool, as Flutter has evolved, it has attracted a lot more developers. And in fact, I think it was in the 2022 developer survey out of Stack Exchange that Dart was in the top 6, or it was in the top 10 languages. JavaScript, I think, was number 1.
Yeah, not surprisingly.
And so if JavaScript is not going to solve the problem, you want to pick something that's at least more popular, that still gets you to that close to the metal experience. And Dart certainly, which underpins the Flutter environment, Flutter framework, gives us that capability. UI5, enterprise friendly. There is really a full stack down to governance and access that is integral to the UI5 environment. And so when I have a component that is tied to a back-end service, that I can be pretty confident that if I've granted Andy, I've put Andy in the role for that component, that then he's going to be able to access that component and interact with it. On the other hand, if he's absent from the group, the component might even not show up for him, you know. But the basic premise is that the governance that is in the core of the environment in SAP is extended all the way out through that interaction framework, and that's a really important thing. And which gets to the integration with SAP. Because UI5 was built by SAP for use with SAP, it really is that full stack approach to the interaction model, and you have a pretty high confidence level that when users are doing things in that UX, that it reflects back in close to real time to the system without you having to do a lot of extra work. In one of the earlier panel discussions, we had some conversations about being able to do offline work. And one of the challenges to doing offline is if you make changes to records that you've cached on your device, now when you come back online, you have to figure out, first of all, can you synchronize? And secondarily, are you going to be able to reconcile where where somebody had already made a change on the live system, and now you're trying to change, maybe you overwrite that, or you've created a conflict, and that you have to have a reconciliation process on the back end to make sure that you get the right data in, instead of having that new event overwrite whatever was in the environment. The UI5, as I mentioned, we were able to do a lot of branding, and that improves the consistency of user experience, whether a user is in Flutter or UI5. We also have ServiceNow as a platform, and the more consistent we can be across all of those experiences, the easier it is for our users to onboard, to be productive, to embrace the systems that they have to use to do their work. And we want to keep that relatively transparent, so it's important. Flexible delivery options. With UI5, we can deliver, it's a responsive design. So whether I'm on a tablet or, as Andy mentioned, the mobile data terminal, MDTs, a laptop or a phone, that design, I can be pretty confident the design is going to render relatively properly for that particular device form factor and user experience. And that again helps reduce the amount of differentiation in terms of development effort that I have to put in. And then it's JavaScript based, and as I mentioned in the developer survey, JavaScript is pretty popular. A lot of people, there's a huge community of developers that know JavaScript. So we had a skill set in the market that we could draw on. Now, combining that JavaScript skill set with UI5 is a little bit more, a little less of a commodity skill set, but there is that organizational or that community capability in the market, and it's a little easier to source that talent. And this is just a recap of a lot of those decision criteria. You know, I think the ones on the bottom are the things that we had to agonize over a little bit. You know, can we do this in-house? And we had some skills, but it was great to have a partner like Mindset who could really facilitate and guide us. So that, you know, it's almost like pair programming, right? You've got somebody looking over your shoulder who can advise you and say, well, you know, that might be better if you do it this way. And so we were very, it was a great partnership to be able to take advantage of that extra knowledge and experience to inform our own work. With the Flutter stuff, it was an emerging skill set, and as a result, that were, it was difficult. We were.
It's hard to be
we felt,
first.
Huh?
It's hard to be first.
It is. It really is.
Yeah.
And you know, we felt very much like pioneers at that point. But at the same time, it was very important for us strategically to set to position ourselves. And so that covers really the core decision criteria and the framework stuff.
So real quick, Joe. I know we're getting close to our time here.
Okay.
I'm wondering if there's been any questions so far of any of the presentation material? Other questions? No? Well, in that case, you want to keep talking about cloud and sort of the decision criteria that helped you, decide the differences between your cloud options?
Sure. You know, and this is really a recap of some of what we talked about before. We had already begun the journey with AWS, and so what we were continuing with the employee experience transformation work was building on top of that. It's hard to argue with AWS's service catalog. They are an extremely prolific provider, and they have a head start on everybody else who's doing cloud. It's a very easy to source market skill. So in the same way that, say, JavaScript is on the client side, you can find AWS talent in the market pretty easily. A lot of what gets done in AWS, there are playbooks, there are run books. You can Google almost anything that you're trying to accomplish and find at least a handful of solution paths to pursue with that, and it's really helpful. It's a proven commercial platform. Companies like Netflix, for gosh sakes, build their entire business on the AWS cloud platform. Well, not the entire business, but a significant value delivery of what their consumer service relies on AWS. So, it's a proven platform. We know that we can trust it. And there's that huge partner ecosystem, which gets back to, who do we choose to partner with? And Mindset, of course, brings us a lot of value in that space. With Azure, Xcel Energy is a very big Microsoft shop, and of course, with our adoption of Azure Active Directory for single sign-on, that's been an important factor in how we bring things together. And I've seen in a number of other presentations today that there is a lot of commonality in using something centralized like Azure Active Directory to provide that identity environment. And Xcel Energy embraced that, and it has helped us reduce complexity, provide more consistency, and give us a overall better user experience for our communities. We already know how to run a lot of Microsoft, whether that's Active Directory or Azure Active Directory, Microsoft SharePoint, OneDrive, the overall M365 catalog of capabilities. It provided us a springboard from which to start diving into more things like the Azure AD App Proxy. We already had a support agreement in place with Microsoft, and we had not only just the support agreement, but we had a dedicated team at Microsoft, an account team that is facilitating our success with the platform. And of course, we have a community of staff and partners to help us take advantage of all of what we've built with Azure. So with Azure, one of the things, again, focusing just on the undesirable impact, we're not mature enough with Azure to take advantage of things like CDN, Content Delivery Network, which could have probably remedied the inconsistent round-trip performance. But it was offset by that single sign-on integration where users, it's a very easy tap a button, do an MFA authentication and you're in, where in previous things like with the MDTs, they had to go through a VPN connection and authenticate 2 or 3 times just to get to the production screens that they were trying to work with. And additionally, on the AWS side, being able to tie in that identity and authentication to the AWS platform was a really big benefit. I think some of the challenges with AWS are, even though it was a really well-known and robust talent pool and platform itself, we have had to work to reduce our spend on, to optimize our spend on the AWS platform. And part of that is just a maturity. Sometimes you get enthusiastic and just leverage a lot of the platform in a way that it isn't optimized for cost management. And it's easy when there is that scope of that really robust catalog of services to just take advantage of whatever is right there for you. And so we've gotten a lot better about that. And that's, I think, one of the big lessons is understand what you're trying to get done so that you are selective and don't just embrace every possible piece of the technical platform and really focus on the things that are going to be value differentiators for you and use that to propel your solution forward. So again, cost is a big aspect of that. So summing it up, understand what you want to do. What do you intend as your outcome? In one case, it was speed. It was how fast can we get a win here? In another case, it was how do we make sure that we position ourselves for the future? And that's not to say that SAP is not part of the future, but our future is bigger than just SAP. And that's why Flutter really is a big part of how we define that future state. Try to avoid shortcuts. We could have done more planning, I think, and had maybe better velocity than we did, particularly with the AWS stuff. As I mentioned, we kind of got a little chaotic there. And I think had we done a little bit more taken a more thoughtful approach to that, we could have reduced a little bit of that waste. Those are lessons we've learned, and again, we're maturing the AWS platform very, very quickly at Xcel Energy, and that's a really helpful aspect of what we're doing with not just employee experience, but also now customer. And partner wisely. You know, who are the companies who are going to benefit you and help you achieve those wins, velocity-wise, strategy-wise, compliance, all of the things that tick the boxes for what you are trying to accomplish.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time today, and please enjoy the conference.